Hello again, Karlien. It's Andrew. Once more, let's have a look at your first task one. I'm just going to jump straight in, essentially. I'm sitting here in my kitchen, quite late at night, correcting essays, drinking coffee, instead of sleeping, on a Sunday. So let's begin. The flowchart demonstrates how 5 different, I would say, types of tea are manufactured. Overall, it is immediately apparent that the process consists, I would say, the process consists of a minimum of 3, and a maximum of 6 steps, depending, I would say dependent is kind of correct actually, but I think it's more appropriate to say depending on which type is being produced. The stages vary by tea type. You could just say the stages vary by type, and that describes the fact that we have different stages for each type of tea. First, regardless of tea type, fresh tea leaves are sorted and cleaned. Cool, so now I know that this first step is done regardless of the type of tea. Excellent. Whereas the next step is different according to the specific type. I would use the singular here. We want to refer to the fact that it's different for each type, for each one. So here, most tea types require withering, except for white and scented tea, for which the next stages are steaming and drying respectively. After steaming, the white tea is dried and is ready to be consumed, while the scented leaves must be whilst in order to produce scented tea, the leaves are infused with flowers and fruits before being finally cooled. Cool. After withering, the green tea leaves are steamed or fired, followed by either rolling and shaping or drying. Oolong and black tea leaves are usually rolled and fermented. For oolong tea, the fermentation stage is short and is followed by a process of pan frying and drying. For black tea, on the other hand, the leaves are fully fermented and finally fried. That's good. I do have a description of every single type. I would say that the only thing I struggled with was the way in which you have grouped your ideas together. I like that you have described generally the graph. Overall, you've described the graph. So what I would do here really is stick to describing the common steps. So this is what all leaves undergo, and these are what the special leaves undergo. That is kind of what you've done, but we have started really well. So what we want to talk about here is clearly that this is the first step for all tea. Then I would say clearly at the start of this sentence that the next stage is, and then what it is for each type of tea. And we could use things like while and whereas. For this type of tea it's this, whereas for this type of tea it's this. While this tea needs this tea needs this. And then we have first, regardless of the type, it's this step. Next, or the next step depends on the type of tea. While this tea needs this tea needs this. After this stage, this tea. So yeah, maybe actually we could say here, all tea types except white and scented tea require withering. Or all tea types except white and scented require withering as the second stage. Actually, all but two types of tea require withering as the second stage, while for white and scented tea, the next stage is steaming and drying respectively. That still works, as long as we say here, all but two types of tea require withering as the second stage, and then it's just more specific. And then we can go on to say, after steaming, the white tea is dried and ready to be consumed, whilst for the production of scented tea, the leaves are infused with flowers, so that we're not using the same word twice. Infused with flowers and fruits before finally being cooled. Okay, so now I'm more satisfied. That works a little bit better. And then we go on here to refer to the final stages, which are obviously quite different for each one. Cool. I'm being quite picky now with your work, because you've gotten to a point where you're quite good, where you've become quite good. So I'm going to start picking up on things that I wouldn't have previously. So your task 2 is next, and we have a discussion of relocation of businesses. So what are the benefits to, I suppose, planning industry, choosing where to put organisations, forcing people to do certain things? So nowadays, companies are being encouraged by local governments to move from the city to the countryside. I would go into a little bit more detail here about what or why this is happening. To relieve congestion in larger cities, maybe? This essay will discuss some positives, plural, as well as disadvantages, just a plural. This says disadvantageous. Oh, disadvantageous effects, okay. But I think positives as well as disadvantages would be fine. When we read things like this, we expect the simplest progression, because we never expect people to complicate things. So when I discuss some positive, then this becomes a little bit complicated for me to read. So I would just say, this essay will discuss some positives as well as disadvantages of this trend, or created by this trend. Firstly, or primarily, banning large companies from the city is considered both beneficial for both individual citizens and local shop managers, as it reduces both traffic congestion and air pollution. This makes city life more enjoyable. I would try not to use makes. Make, do, did, go. They're a little bit not informal. They're not quite precise enough for academic writing. So we could say that the consequence of this is that city life becomes more enjoyable and shopping areas more accessible. And here we could say, so what's the key of this sentence? That it has been observed that since large companies have left, green spaces have increased, heavy traffic has reduced, and urban areas have become safer. So we need to make this a little smaller. I would use a specific example here. I would talk about a city in which this has happened. Even if you just want to make one up, choose a large city. So you can say, for example, since large companies have been forced to leave Budapest, Paris, Beijing, there has been a noticeable increase in green spaces, heavy traffic has reduced, and urban areas have become overall safer. Furthermore, factories can expand more easily in regional locations, whereas in the city centre, I would say they are extremely limited in available space. Cities are incredibly competitive in terms of space, aren't they? They are dense. and each person only has access, on average, to a small amount of the space available. So I would say, furthermore, factories can expand more readily in regional locations where there is greater space available than in city centres. Thus, citizens, local businesses, and larger companies can clearly benefit from this change. I wouldn't say changing pattern, I would just say from this change, or from this trend. Nevertheless, lovely word, it is argued that relocating companies also has some negative consequences, particularly for nature. So we need to not capitalise nature, but also, because this sounds, when you capitalise nature and use it as a single word, you might as well say God. So it's better to describe the actual effect that you're talking about. I would say, because it uses up green space, doesn't it? Countryside space being used by large companies decreases green spaces. So even though the green spaces are increasing in the major cities, they are coming from somewhere. So we're talking about the impact on, shall we say, forest farms and wetlands, or places of natural beauty, or wildlife habitats. So which parts of nature are we harming, and how are we doing it? Because we don't just want to talk about all of it, because like I said, it's not very scientific. We might as well just say God, and that's not what we're talking about. So, for instance, farmers are often forced to sell their land in order to allow the construction of factories, and along with their fields, forests are gradually decreasing in size. Good, but like I said, if we could include that in here, and then we need an example from the real world, somewhere in which this has actually happened. So, or at least a hypothetical situation in which the green area surrounding a city was lost to factories, or a particular forest maybe. Maybe you can think of a time when you saw a charity defending a green space. Why were they doing it? So anything that supports your argument is good, whether it's somebody else making the same argument and giving a reason, or whether it's an example, a real life situation that shows your reasoning, shows what you were saying. So cool, this is an excellent phrase, a loss of biodiversity, but we need to explain why that's bad. If you wanted to talk about a loss of biodiversity here, I would also go on to talk about what that means for the ecosystem or for the food chain. Biodiversity is important to maintain a balanced and resilient ecosystem. Very little biodiversity results in very little resilience, and things die quickly and easily. So this needs expanding properly. I think this paragraph should be made about the loss of biodiversity. In conclusion, although relocating companies from the city to the countryside brings multiple benefits for both cities and companies, there are some important drawbacks regarding the major disturbances caused to areas of natural beauty, natural habitats. Let's go in with some detail and a little bit more expansion as well. So in your conclusion, we're summarizing the whole thing. So let's talk about, this is fine, but let's talk about where these disturbances are happening. And then we could say that in the future, loss of habitat and biodiversity could result in serious, let's say we want to talk about a really urgent and dangerous scenario, because it really is. imperative that we preserve biodiversity and we look after the ecosystem. So we could talk about loss of species or loss of food supplies, any of those sorts of things that happen as a result of industrialization. But overall, you've done quite a good job. I don't think you're going to struggle at all in the IELTS exam. Let's keep going, and let's see if we can make some final improvements to your work before you run off to sit the exam. Thanks once again, Karlien, for these essays. I really enjoy correcting your work. Until next time, have a lovely evening and speak soon.